Yeah, did you know that Swedenborg himself was a gardener? And not only a gardener, but I guess you could call it an avid gardener, and that his cultivation of a particular piece of property actually had a large role to play in him producing the material that we're all reading through in this show. So we thought we'd first give you a little introduction, then walk a little more into the spiritual experiences that he had in tandem. So here's a little bit about what led up to the gardening climate that Swedenborg was in, and then his garden as it was.
If you come all the way up to the 18th century, which is Swedenborg's era, that's the time of Linnaeus, an exciting time for botany. Linnaeus developed the double nomenclature system, and the whole world began using that. So suddenly you were using the same name for a flower. Instead of a rose being called 7 different things, and you don't even know that you're talking about the same thing, suddenly people have a common language around plants and gardens, which is exciting. So Linnaeus did that, and Swedenborg had some contact. People speculate about how much with Linnaeus, but I just find it interesting that this great scientific leap that's happening in botany and the study of nature is occurring at the same time that Swedenborg is living, doing revelation, establishing a garden. So he puts down roots literally in this world at the same time that he's traveling to other worlds. And his garden, I think, is a beautiful space for thinking about how many different influences came together in his life. It was geometric, kind of scientifically laid out, but very imaginative. He had mazes, he had reflecting mirrors, he had orchards, he had a greenhouse. He spent a lot of time meditating in his garden. He had a summer house at one end, and he would read and do his writing and look out on a rose garden and the rest of the garden as well. But he had spiritual experiences about rose gardens in the other world. And so I like to think of his garden as a portal that through his visions, he's going back and forth often through his encounter with his garden.
And we're going to hear a little bit more about how this was a portal. With all this talking about gardens, I thought I should get out in a garden and really see if all the hype is justified. And I did so with our next guest, who's actually written a book called Swedenborg's Garden of Theology, which is a good little intro to Swedenborg. You can get on Swedenborg.com, as you can get Dr. King's book there as well. This next guest, you've probably met him before, Dr. Jonathan Rose, and he and I sat down in a garden so he could tell me the stories of Swedenborg's garden and what the spirits around him thought about it as he was making it.
Swedenborg was a lifelong bachelor, and so there'd really been no need for him to own a home of his own. He had always rented. He'd sometimes stayed with his sister and her husband, or rented with other, friends and so on, to be attached to a household and so on. So it wasn't until 1743, when he was 55 years old, that he first bought his own property. And it's interesting that in 1743 is when his spiritual eyes began to open, so to speak. That's the earliest date that he gives for his spiritual transformation. So it's fascinated me that at the same time as he was moving more into heaven, he was moving more into this world, becoming more a citizen of this world.
And once he had this, so he had this garden, he was like putting a lot of work into it, made it his own. He began to have his spiritual experiences and his physical experiences kind of intertwined there. And there was one story about there were some spirits who didn't want part of his garden done or something like that. What was that?
Yeah, there's a passage from May of 1746 where Swedenborg hints at this fact, and then a couple of years later he gets back to it again in his spiritual experiences, talks about the fact that there were evil spirits who did not want him to cultivate his garden.
No, don't do it. Don't go to Home Depot.
Yeah, it's amazing. They were very, they filled his head with like horrifying images of how bad it would be if he fixed up this garden. don't, so they poured it on thick of like, it'll be so horrible, it'll be profane and disgusting and loathsome if you do this.
Right. Try to intimidate him out of going after it. But why? Why did they want to, do you know?
It's not explained in there, but it is a fascinating suggestion that cultivation was so important. That's where Swedenborg wrote his theological works a lot of the time. That's where he was when he was writing. And there are even times Swedenborg has spiritual experiences in which he says that he's walking through his garden and angels are telling him what the different flowers mean and what they're good for, what their use is, and all that kind of thing. So there was a real platform for heaven there, and I think hell did not want that platform there. It wanted it to be kept in a kind of a wild and undeveloped state. It hated the cultivation.
Well, this is fascinating to think about. I don't know, that heaven and hell being present enough that hell knows, oh, you're trying to cultivate this garden. We don't want you. You sort of think of them like, but that they knew, oh, you have this piece of real estate. We don't want you to put these plants in here because we know it's going to lead to. It's just like that level of involvement is fascinating.
It's amazing. It's amazing that they would want to interfere. It also seems so like life to me that they attack at the very beginning.
Right.
He had bought it in 1743. I feel the need to explain why it was the beginning, because although he'd owned it for 3 years at that point, he had been traveling almost that whole time. And so this was the first spring where he could really develop the garden. He'd owned the property, but then he left and went abroad for a number of years and came back. So this is the first opportunity to cultivate it. And so at the very beginning of when he's starting to turn the earth, or even just think about, well, what will I do here? There's a blank slate, should I have flowers? Should I have, fruits and vegetables?
Yeah.
They're getting in there and just pouring it on thick. And when they filled his head with these horrible images connected with the garden, when Swedenborg even just thought about that, 2 years later, the spirits around him were deeply horrified, and they felt nauseous. Just the fact that these mental images had been associated with that garden. When he thinks of the garden, they're all, and they're, and he had to kind of talk them down.
Yeah. Well, that to me is like, just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Which seems
Yes.
like counterintuitive, but there is a level of deception in which his spirits, which if he wasn't awakened to the influence of spirits, he would just, I have a really bad feeling about this garden. I really don't like it.
Yeah.
But to see that traced back to, no, that was because of an initial deception. It was actually something really good. I'm not saying everything that doesn't feel good is good, but something about that, it's not like everything that bothers you really is what it claims to be.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Don't trust all the feelings or all the thoughts that you have.
Yeah.
Because not all of them are coming from a good place. Somebody's got an agenda,
Yeah.
and they're trying to get you to stop something that you want to do. It was interesting to me how Swedenborg calmed the spirits down a couple of years later when he was talking to them about this. But what he told them was, hey, when things change hands, even if there was some great uncleanness there or something because of the people who were there previously, and maybe they did some horrendous thing. I don't know what the spirits put in his mind.
Yeah.
But there was some idea like, oh no, there was a murder here. So we don't know.
Yeah.
But they put something into his head about it. Swedenborg said, when the land changes ownership, that uncleanness is gone. It's different owners. And the example he used for that was the temple at Jerusalem, which used to be an idolatrous worship, way back in the day before the children of Israel were in there. It was used for idolatrous worship, and then then that changed. That did it for the spirits. Like okay, that was a good example. So he used a biblical example to try to tell them that, oh no, under new ownership is like, no, that, and there is something in our spirit that feels like, oh, if something bad happened in an apartment that I'm renting, or in this car, in this house, or something like that, you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't live here. Maybe there's bad, karma in here, or something like that.
Yeah, well, it just seems like the whole thing is a story of how evil claims to be more powerful than it is. Like we have control of this plot of land, this bad thing lingers there. If you do this, there's going to be evil. But it's all smoke and mirrors. That actually they were doing that because they knew, like, we're in trouble if this goes down. So,
Yeah,
and
that's
is that replicated in all of our lives? There's all these like grand fears of if you make this choice, this bad thing is going to happen. You better watch out because this, even the bad, like over exaggerating the lasting impact of the bad things in our lives. Like this thing
Right.
happened. Remember how that happened? It's just, it's there and it's happened. It's unassailable in its evilness and
So
it's the most
heinous.
important thing in your life. But really, it's not. It's just the same. They just don't want that recultivated. You know.
Right. That's right. It's reminiscent of those movies where people go back in time to try to stop something because they know from the future that it gets so powerful that you want to stop it, you know, kind of thing. So they realize, oh, this is, you know, I don't know how they got a heads up about it, but they wanted to stop him from cultivating that garden at the very outset. It's really, really interesting. I might add that at the time that they were trying to stop him, he had not published a single word of his theology yet.
Oh, okay.
You know, it was still just, he was 3 years away before, you know, he was 3 years from publishing his first volume of theology.
Was he writing? Has he already started writing?
He was writing.
Okay.
Yeah, he was writing, you know, manuscript stuff, studying scripture and starting to get the siphon going.
Yeah.
But
Probably still pretty hesitant about the whole project at that time. You know, like,
yeah.
am I really doing this? Like, I'm really gonna throw away my reputation? Is this real? You know, so very vulnerable time for him to have that.
In the very stuff that he was writing then, he said, see whether I should keep this in here or if I ever publish this or, you know, I'm not sure what this is or I don't know what's going on and I don't know where there's this leading somewhere. Right. It was very early stages. So they got in there early and tried to, you know.
Yeah, and think about the worry on his part about the reception. He was putting out something so different than probably anything he'd come across. Is anybody going to get this? Is anybody going to like this? What's this going to do? Is this really as good as I think it is? So that they must have sensed like, oh, this is when we could maybe still get him.
Yeah, we've got a shot here.